Today's episode is brought to you by We Quilt, a new book by Thomas Knauer. In a world of same-day delivery, cutting fabric into small pieces and stitching them back together makes little practical sense. Yet the quilting community thrives. In Why We Quilt, Thomas Knauer highlights 40 contemporary makers who share not only their stunning quilts, but also powerful insights into what compels them to keep quilting. So check this book out. It's brand new, and it's called Why We Quilt, Contemporary Makers Speak Out. Thank you so much, Why We Quilt. And now, here's the show. Welcome to episode 154 of the Craft Industry Alliance podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Craft Industry Alliance is a community for craft professionals where you can strengthen your creative business, stay up to date on industry news, and build connections within our supportive trade association. Check it out at craftindustryalliance.org. And today on the show, we are talking about Quilts Inc. with my guest, Teresa Duryea Wong. Teresa has authored 2 books on Japanese quilts and textiles, and in early 2019, she published American Cotton Farm to Quilt. She currently travels to Japan and throughout the United States to research, write, and lecture. She holds a master's degree in liberal studies from Rice University, and in 2014 was named the Faith P. and Charles L. Bybee Scholar by the Texas Quilt Museum and the Bybee Foundation. Teresa is a regular contributor to Curated Quilts magazine and also writes for Art Quilt Quarterly. She is a passionate quilter and also loves making bags and garments. Next month, she'll debut another new book at the International Quilt Festival titled Magic and Memories, 45 Years of International Quilt Festival. This book shares the story of the history of Quilt Festival and the 2 women who founded that event. Teresa Wong, welcome.
Thank you so much, Abby. I'm just so excited to be here with you today.
Thank you. So I want to talk about your new book, this history of International Quilt Festival in Houston, which is a show I think many people have been to or want to go to or know about, and about the history of Quilts Inc. and Carrie and Nancy, who founded that company and the show. But I think in order to get there and to how you came to write that book, we kind of need to trace a little bit of the path that you yourself have taken. So I know that you graduated from Rice and that you spent some time working in the beginning as a journalist. Is that right? Were you at a small town newspaper or at some other kind of publication?
I actually have my bachelor's degree from a small university in Houston, University of St. Thomas. And right after that, I went to work as a journalist in television news at the CBS affiliate in Houston. And I worked there for about 7 years and kind of worked my way, kind of up the ladder. And I did a lot of jobs. I started as an intern and I eventually became a camera woman. So I was out filming news every day and did that for years. And then later I came back as an on-camera journalist and was doing arts reporting for them. So then I left and started freelance writing, and I was doing a lot of journalism and magazine articles. And then I began publishing a fine art magazine, and I did that for 23 issues. So we had a monthly publication covering the fine arts in Houston and the Texas region. This was publishing in the days long before the internet, so things were, very different back in those days.
And is that a magazine? Did you sorry to interrupt. Did you found that magazine, or were you like on staff?
No, my father and I founded it together and started the magazine. And we pretty much focused on fine art and then later expanded into performing arts as well. So it was a lot of fun. And it was it was a difficult road, but I think I learned so much about the art world, but also about managing a business, which I, as a journalist, had not had aspects of all the, all that side of the business side of running a business as well. So it was a great learning experience.
Yeah. And were you quilting at that time, or had quilting not sort of fallen on your radar yet?
Not yet. So I had been doing embroidery since I was about 8 years old, and I sewed garments and clothes a lot, all throughout my whole life. So I then started, I went to work in the corporate world, and I live in Houston. So if you live in Houston and you want to work, you're going to eventually end up in the oil and gas world. So I did that for about a little over 22 years in the corporate world. And when my daughter was in elementary school, I met a woman who became, and it still is, my very best friend. And she lived down the street, and she made these amazing quilts, and she taught me how to quilt. And so I think that was around 1998 or 99.
Okay, got it. So that was the introduction. Yeah, but it sounds like you were interested in art and in like the visual arts, far
Definitely.
Before that. So you were sort of primed to be interested and you were interested in handwork and you sewed. So like the introduction of quilting was kind of a natural fit.
Yes, and my grandmother quilted. I just never learned it from her.
Okay. And so do you remember the first quilt that you made?
Oh, yes. And my friend Amy made it with me. And it was for my daughter's bed. And as I've done so much research for all my books, and I talk to quilters so many times, I say, what was the first quilt you made? And almost half the time people say, oh, I made a quilt for my daughter's bed, which I thought was so funny. But my friend also took me to my very first festival that same year, 1999. So I've been going to festival for 20 years. And that has had a huge impact on just so many things that I've learned and opening my eyes to this quilting world.
Yeah. So let's talk about, and we're going to come back to sort of the rest of your career in a minute, but let's talk about that impact because that's interesting. Like you live in Houston and, Quilt Festival. I mean, for people who've never heard of it, because there are people who sort of listen to the show who are outside of the quilting world, and for them, maybe they don't know about this show, but for people within the quilting world, it is the show, certainly in the US, but it's also like worldwide, the show. Maybe outside of Japan, there's probably bigger shows in Japan, but other than that, right? Like it's one of the biggest shows in the world. So kind of explain like the impact of this show, both on your life and also sort of in the world of quilting.
Yeah, as you say, it is the largest show in the Western world. The Tokyo International Great Quilt Festival in Japan has a larger attendance. They're over 200,000. And the International Quilt Festival in Houston is closer to 50 or 60,000 people. But it's larger in terms of and unique in terms of what it offers. And that is sort of a three-pronged event. And one is the education component. There's no other festival or event in the world that compares to the offerings that you will find at the International Quilt Festival in Houston, which is held every week around the end of November, end of October, 1st of November. The second component they have is obviously the shopping. There's something like over 1,000 different booths, and they're literally from all over the world. And the third huge component is the exhibition. And the quilts at Quilt Festival are, they're just magnificently hung. They're just so gorgeous, and there's just seemingly thousands of them.
And it's juried. I mean, it's not, you can't just have your quilt there. You have to apply, and it's juried to get your quilt hung there.
Well, it's a mix, so it's a little confusing, but the biggest part of the exhibition comes from the International Quilt Association, or IQA, and that is a juried, highly competitive event. And it's, a competition you enter, and then the jury selects whether your quilt will be exhibited, and then they select winners. And those where you get the big winners that, the best of show is a $10,000 check. And, it kind of goes down from there. But there's lots of other exhibits that are, some are juried and some are not. So there's the Modern Quilt Guild, for example, has done exhibits. There's a lot of exhibits of antique quilts. There are exhibits of guilds who, like the state of Texas, will draw the best of the best from their guild shows and put those in. So it's a mix. And it's just, the SAQA, the Studio Art Quilts Associates, do a big exhibit. For years, there were Jamie Fingal and Leslie Tucker did Dinner at 8, and that show ran for like 12 years. So it's just a lot of different quilts on view.
Okay. So if you are, a person who loves quilts, this is your heaven. This is a dream. You go, you learn, you take classes, you shop and buy things you couldn't find or source elsewhere, and you get inspired because you walk this incredible exhibit and you meet people who are just like you and have a great time just talking to everybody. So it's just this fabulous, sort of experience. And so you yourself have been going to this since the late 1990s when you first learned to quilt. And so if you can just say a few words about the impact it's had on your own life personally.
It's just really hard to describe how impactful and how influential this event is. Not only is it like a community, like you said, and a lot of fun, but I've been to obviously the festivals in Japan for many years and many, many other festivals in the U.S. And this one is truly international. It's not, it's not just like semi-international. I mean, it's like a big deal. So you'll find things and people and vendors and quilts from every corner of the world. And for me personally, this was the very first place about 10 years ago that I ever saw Japanese quilts. And I took a class I took classes for maybe 10 or 15 years. And I took a class from Noriko Endo maybe about 10 years ago. And it would just opened my eyes to this whole other world and this whole other aesthetic that I really fell in love with. And eventually, when I left the corporate world, went on to write 2 books on Japanese quilts. So.
Right. So I want to talk about those now, actually. So that's a very good transition. So right. So it introduced you to, or opened your eyes and broaden your horizons. And that's something that can happen when you go and you learn from the best of the best. And it's interesting to think that, people are coming from all over the world to learn, but also to teach at this event, and also to vend at this event. So you're going to be able to discover things you really could not discover at your local quilt shop or certainly at like a chain store. Which is really a reason for people to travel and attend. So you've written 2 books about Japanese textiles that are intended for an American hobbyist audience to consume these books. One of them is called Japanese Contemporary Quilts and Quilters, and this is about sort of the interplay between American and Japanese quilting and sort of the back and forth, right, between these 2 cultures and how quilting sort of went from America to Japan and back again a little bit. Am I explaining that right? Or you tell us how this, like what this book is all about.
Yeah, I think that's a very apt way to describe it. The Japanese have a long, long history making textiles and sewing and doing beautiful work with sashiko and kojin and so many other beautiful stitching techniques. But they learned about quilting in the way we think of a quilt with a patchwork or applique top from America. And that is something that is so interesting to me that, this young country would teach an old country with so many, time-honored tradition, something new. And so I document kind of how that happened starting in the mid 1970s. And I interviewed, dozens and dozens of people and heard their stories of how they first learned to quilt, making, American blocks over and over again until they were perfected. And so I really sort of document that whole journey of how influence can travel from one country to another. And then, as you say, back again, because now it's by the 1990s, Japan had very much defined their own aesthetic. It was no longer, an American copy, if you will. It was very much a Japanese aesthetic in the quilt form. So they brought that back over here and have inspired countless of Americans and other Westerners like me. So it's a really great story, I think.
Yeah. And then, I myself personally, and I think many quilters, love Japanese fabrics, and the quality of the quilting fabrics that you buy from Japan is just so beautiful and is really different from the fabric that you get in the US to quilt with. So I wondered if you could talk about sort of that and why that is and why this incredible fabric comes from Japan.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that there was so much to say about Japan. So that kind of inspired me to write a second book, which is Cotton and Indigo from Japan. And half of that book is about their very, very old textiles in Japan and how they were made. But at the end, sort of the second half of that book is about the very new textiles from Japan and this beautiful quilting cotton that we have from Japan today. And I went into the textile mills in Japan, which was such an amazing adventure for me. And it was very difficult to get into them because, they have these. Their process is really a competitive advantage, and they don't want to share it. So part of what makes the fabric so beautiful is the finishes that they put on these, and those finishes are very, very closely guarded secrets. But it's the detail that they put into those, the cotton that they start with, the process by which they're printing the fabrics, which is a process called automated flat screen printing, which is very similar to a silk screen process. If anyone's ever, drug a silk screen across a negative and, printed onto a textile. And that process is not the fastest or the cheapest way to print quilting cotton, but it's the best. And those are some of the reasons why we have such gorgeous fabric coming out of Japan today.
Okay, that's so neat. What a neat experience for you to be able to go and have in the process of writing those books. And so for a long time, and it sounds like you're still doing this, you have been a lecturer.
Yes.
So you lecture at guilds, you lecture at events where quilters gather. And I wondered if you could talk for a moment about what makes for a good lecture, because I think there are quite a few people listening to the show who would like to become lecturers or would like to add lecturing about quilts or about, knitting or about whatever it is that they do to their portfolio, and would appreciate hearing some tips about what goes into putting together a good lecture.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. It's one of my passions, actually. And I think I definitely draw on my experience having worked in television where you have to bring things alive with visuals. But also my whole career, I feel like I was working on telling stories and explaining things to people. But I think with a good lecture, you have to tell a story, and a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And a story has to have strong visuals. And I get so frustrated because the vast majority of lectures that I go to hear myself are so boring. And I just really would love to help people make their lectures better. But I think you really have to put a lot of energy in your voice. You have to have really strong visuals, and you have to think about the most important thing is, what is your audience? Who are they? What do they want to hear? it's not what do you want to tell them? It's what will they want to hear that would be interesting for them, and then figure out a way to tell that story. And it's not a slide with, 14 PowerPoint bullets on it. No, it's a bright, beautiful photo that gets people thinking or inspiring. Your job is to talk and tell the story and not ask your audience to read bullet points off a slide, which is one of my huge pet peeves. I've been lecturing now for, I think about 4 years, and I'm now coming to some of my guilds the third time. So keep getting asked back. And, people just tell me all the time that they really enjoy that my lectures are casual, but also educational. And most of all, not boring. And I hear that a lot. So I just really get a big kick out of doing it. And it's a big thrill for me.
I want to take a minute now to talk a little bit about our sponsor, Why We Quilt. Contemporary Makers Speak Out by Thomas Knauer. This is a brand new book that will be in stores very soon. And it's super cool. First of all, it is small in format, which makes it really giftable. And it's got this super cool die cut cover that's like a window pane, which makes it really pretty. So when you open it up, you can see a quilt through the cover, which I love. And inside, there are 40 contemporary quilt makers who are profiled. And some of them are names you are totally going to recognize. Many of them actually have been guests on this podcast, including Thomas himself, but lots of other people. Molly Sparkles, who's been on this show. Jen Carlton Bailey has been on this show. So many people. Casey York has been on this show. Lots and lots of people. Amy Friend. And the list goes on and on. Malka Dubrowski. It's like a list of everybody who's been on the show in the past. And they talk about what motivates them to quilt. And also we get to see images of their work. This book blends bits of North American quilting history with insights into how mostly women throughout the centuries have used quilts to make political statements, personal statements, and creative statements, which I love. I love reading those stories. From temperance quilts to the AIDS quilt, there is a really rich history of individuals and communities using fabric and thread to connect with others and express themselves. Nobody is better at pulling those stories out than Thomas. So he does that so well, and it brings it all together in this book, Why We Quilt. He really highlights themes of tradition, of community, of consumerism, of change, and of creativity. And I think this book is just such a good one to add to your collection if you are a person who loves quilts and quilting, or if you know someone who does and just need to get them a super cool holiday gift, which the holidays are right around the corner. This is ideal. So go check it out. It's called Why We Quilt: Contemporary Makers Speak Out, The Power of Art, Activism, Community, and Creativity by Thomas Knauer. It will be in bookstores very soon. I blurbed the back, which is super cool. So you got to go see that as well. And thank you so much, Story Publishing and Why We Quilt, for sponsoring this episode. And now back to my conversation with Teresa. Yeah, I love that piece of advice around starting with a story. And I think that is so important. And if you can start with a story and then sort of continue the storyline, right? And then when you end, you wrap it up with the end of the story. Like you tie it in a bow that way. It right. really helps. And, you know, all people, and you think about children, right? Children love to hear a story. Tell me a story, read me a book, you know, and we are still that way. That's how human beings are wired. They want to hear a story. And so if you can tell a story, even if it applies really to writing a blog post too, right? Just start with a story and it hooks people. And that's such a good point.
Yes, thank you. It's, and I also love being with the guilds, and I think I get a lot of energy and enjoyment from that. I often say that, you know, in my corporate years, I worked for mostly men. And, a lot of times my boss could never even bother to say hello. It's just such a different environment. And when you come to the guilds, everyone is so happy to see you, and they're so nice, and they're such cool people. And we share this common interest that it's just a blast to be with the guilds and be a part of their events.
Yeah. And the fact that you love it really shows as well. I think that's really important. I was working as a sixth grade teacher, and there was a teacher on my team. I was the social studies teacher, but there was a teacher on my team named Lou who taught English, and he had been there forever. He was like really close to retirement, and he never planned his lessons. He had nothing on the bulletin boards. He his room was really spare. And yet the kids during our free time would always run to his classroom, and they loved Lou. And we were like, why do the kids love Lou so much? And then it occurred to us one day, me and the other teachers on our team, the Lou loved the kids, and it was he loved them. And that's why they loved him. And that's always stuck with me. And I feel like if you love the guilds, you love the people there, it shows. That makes a difference too. So, okay. So you wrote this other book, and we're building up here to the Quilt Festival book. I promise we're almost there. So you wrote this one other book about American made cottons. And I know, with the recent trade tariffs, this became a really big topic because people were quite surprised to learn that, quilting fabric, for the most part, the cotton is grown overseas, mostly in Asia, and it's printed, almost all of it is printed in Asia as well, and then imported into the United States. And that's just the way it is. It's much more economical. Yet with, the trade tariffs from China, it becomes somewhat more difficult, although a lot of our fabric is printed in Korea and in Japan. So, but you wrote this book about American-made cottons called American Cotton Farm to Quilt, which is like farm to table. I love that play. So what drew you to this topic? How did you find this topic? Because this is somewhat of a departure from your Japanese studies.
So when I was researching the story of cotton and indigo from Japan, and I was learning about the new quilt fabric that they're making there, I learned that about 40% of Japan's cotton comes from America. And the reason is because American cotton is the highest quality cotton in the world. And so I went out to Lubbock out in West Texas and talked with farmers. And I sort of followed that path, and I ended up in this warehouse in Osaka where I had seen the cotton from the farm I had just been on a few weeks earlier. So it's an amazing story. And so when I was out talking with those farmers, I just became so enamored, and I thought, I'm going to come back and finish this story. So I decided to come back and really focus on it's kind of a two-part story. And one is the textile industry in the 1900s, so about 1900 till about 1980, when all the quilting cotton fabric moved overseas. And then I talk about what's happening right now. And there are a small handful of companies who are bringing back American-made quilting cotton. And I'm seeing it a little bit more and more, but it's a tough road to do that. So I focus on what's happening on the cotton farm right now and why the American cotton is still such high quality, and how technology is changing everything. And then I follow the story of a couple of different companies that are bringing back that cotton that's grown in America with fabrics that are made in America.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's interesting. I mean, I spent some time living in the Mississippi Delta, where there's lots of cotton farms, although there's more of it in Texas, I think, than in Mississippi now. But those cotton farms are not owned by family farms the way that they used to be. They're these giant, massive corporations that own these cotton farms.
Actually, that's not true.
Really?
And I'm so glad you said that, because I did a ton of research on that. And the cotton farms are 99% family owned.
Okay.
And when I talked to farmers about this, they got so frustrated, and they don't understand why this myth keeps continuing. But there's a couple of reasons, but a lot of the farms are formed as LLCs, so it looks like a large corporation, and it might be that the farm has passed down, and there might be 5 or 6 or 8 families that are involved in the farm, and maybe one family runs it. So they formed these LLCs as a way to, as a smart business. And then recently, in the last few years, there's been a lot more investors interested in cotton and cotton farming. But America's row crops, and not the same for dairy farms, but America's row crops are still family owned.
Okay.
And this is a really important point because these are really salt of the earth people who are doing this because they love it. And it's a great, great story.
Yeah. All right. I need to get this book because I clearly have some things to learn. So, and the main company that you look at batting a lot, right? You looked at like the Warm Company batting, and then at Clothworks as well, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So most people, we think about our quilts and the quilt top and the quilt backing and our binding, and we really don't spend that much time thinking about batting. But I was so fascinated to learn that the Warm Company in particular, they buy 4 million pounds of American cotton every year. And that is about 7,000 acres of West Texas farmland. So that's a lot of cotton just going to one company. And all of that goes into Warm and Natural. So I went to their factory up near Seattle and learned how batting was made. Hobbs also uses a lot of American cotton. And I think for me personally, 100% cotton batting is the only option. I never use any kind of synthetics. But it's a great story about how they're buying a lot of American cotton every single year. And as you mentioned, Clothworks is the owner of American Made brand, which is a line of solids that are made 100% in America with American grown cotton.
So cool. All right, great. Well, that's a neat story, and I think it's great that you spend some time working on it and highlighting it. So, so that book is called American Cotton Farm to Quilt. If people want to go and pick that one up, and so now here we are. Okay, we are at your new book, which is called Magic and Memories: 45 Years of International Quilt Festival. And this book is basically a biography of the owners of Quilts Inc., Carrie Bressenhan and Nancy Puentes, and they are cousins, but they were raised as sisters basically. And besides Quilt Festival, they also own Quilt Market, which is the trade show for the quilting industry. And the book actually will be for sale in November at Festival, but then once Festival's over, it will be available everywhere, like on Amazon and everywhere books are sold, that kind of thing. So if people want to pick up a copy, they can go to Festival or wait until right after Festival and then pick up their copy. So I'm wondering how you came to this idea that there needed to be a biography of these two women. I wondered if other people also had tried to write a book like this in the past, and maybe had less success than you had.
I do believe that they were probably approached before me, but for my purposes, it was 2 reasons why I wanted to write this book. One was, as I said earlier, I've gone to Festival every year for 20 years, and all those years that I had a huge, stressful, demanding job, I never let that job get in the way of going to Festival. Like there was just no way I wasn't going. And so it's just had a big impact on my own life personally. But I also wanted to know what happened? Why was this event so successful? How did it become so international? How did it become so influential in the quilt world? And who built it? And I had the sort of a very special opportunity to meet Carrie and Nancy in person in early 2014 when they gave me this honor at the Texas Quilt Museum when I was doing research. And so I got to know them and we had a nice lunch and I started asking them questions and I just got really enamored with their story. And the more I learned about their story and the more I learned about how many women came along with them in the very, very early days, all of this was done out of love and passion. There was no business plan. There was no, corporate consultants who helped them, drive this thing forward. It was just all done for the love of quilts. And it was to me, like a missionary zeal. And I just found that fascinating. And I really wanted to find out more and capture all that.
Okay. So, I mean, I think it is hard for people, myself included, to totally understand the impact that Carrie and Nancy actually had on building the quilting industry as we know it today. Because, like, I know I didn't fully appreciate it until I read the story in the book. Because we look around, we see all of these fabric companies. Actually, we complain sometimes that there's too much fabric on the market, right? Like there's the release cycles are too rapid, the collections are too big, right? That's all the talk right now. Like, how do we slow this train down? But we take for granted that the supplies that we need to be quilters are, plentiful and everywhere. But that has actually only been the case for a pretty short number of years. And it was really brought about in large part by just a few people, and women primarily. And Carrie and Nancy were, among those women. So that's what this story is. So Carrie and her mother-in-law owned an antique shop together. And that was the beginning. So Carrie, and it was sort of fascinating. There's a lot of feminist beginnings here, very, sort of feminist renegade. And it was not easy, the sort of beginnings of starting this company. Carrie wanted to buy out her mother-in-law and sort of own the shop entirely, and was denied a bank loan from multiple banks unless she agreed to have her husband be the co-signatory, because the banks wouldn't do it without a man as a co-signatory, which it was against the law, but nonetheless,
right.
And she refused to have him be the co-signatory, and kept, going from bank to bank until she found one that would agree to have a woman sign, be the only signatory on a bank loan. And it was like the sixth bank or something that she had to go to.
Exactly. And that was 1974. And the Equal Lending Opportunity Act had just passed, and she still was denied. And Carrie is formidable, and she just wasn't having it. It was her business, and she wasn't going to have her husband sign a loan with her. So she tells this funny story that I put in the book, that finally she walked to this very small bank across the street from her office, from her store. And she said she had a chip on her shoulder as big as the Titanic. And she walked in and, basically said, I need a loan, and I have a business, and I've got bills to pay, and I am not having my husband sign, before the banker could ever get a word in. And, she was successful with them. So she is a very determined woman, and very visionary, and has done, really, like you said, some very remarkable things in this industry.
Yeah. And I think, again, we take for granted that, it's that women are going to be treated a certain way, but this was not the case. And this was not very long ago either. So Carrie and Nancy. So really, exhibiting quilts on display was something that Carrie did very quickly. So she bought this antique shop from her mother-in-law and made it into a fabric shop, a shop for quilting fabric, which basically quilting fabric barely existed. But she wanted to exhibit quilts pretty much from the get-go, and had like an exhibit of quilts in the shop pretty much the first year.
The first, it was 1975, was the first show of quilts in her store. Yes. And the store, as you said, it slowly morphed from being an antique store to a store that focused on selling antique quilts and to a full-fledged retail quilt shop.
Yeah.
And it was called Great Expectations. And she ran that store for many, many, many years while she was simultaneously running festival and market and all those things.
Right. And they started Market together in 1981 at the suggestion of a fellow quilt shop owner. And Carrie used the show really as a way to teach the fabric manufacturers about what quilters needed and to show them that there was a market for quilting products, for quilting fabric. And she did that by making rules about what was going to be allowed to be sold at this trade show.
Yes, it was 1979. That was the first market.
Okay.
And she had a couple of vendors that signed on right away. And once they did, it sort of attracted others. And then she went and told every single one of them that's a cotton only rule. And meaning you cannot bring any synthetics. You cannot bring any of your plaids or polyesters or, crazy velvets or any of those things. Because if you are not bringing 100% cotton prints that I would sell in my quilt shop, then you can't sell them at market. And this was shocking to the manufacturers because, they thought they would just have all these women and they'd just sell their usual stuff. And they were shocked and changed. It sort of brought about this enormous change at the same time and forced them to think in a completely different way. And that rule was relaxed later. Because people began, experimenting with different fabrics. But I think that this rule is an example of Carrie's very unique leadership, because if you were a company that was in the business of running trade shows, you'd never do something crazy like that because you risk the chance that your vendors would back out or would be pissed off at you, forgive my bad language, but, you wouldn't take that risk. Because you want to sell booths and you want your vendors to come, and you wouldn't necessarily have that same passion for the end product that Carrie brought to this show. So I think it was a very risky and very gutsy move, and it taught the manufacturers what a quilt shop was and what a quilter wanted, and had a big impact on the cotton that we have available for us today.
Right, because you just wanted to have a good yellow.
Yes. And I wrote in my book that she often says, yella. We needed yella fabric, in her sweet Texas, little bit of a Texas accent there, because there was no yellow fabric in a cotton print, because it wasn't popular for garments. So that was one of the things. They also did not have any dark cotton prints. And when Jenny Beyer started the very first collection of cotton prints that was made exclusively for the independent quilt shops in 1981, she had a whole selection in colorways, and some of them were very dark and they go all the way into the brighter prints. And at the time, the salesmen were appalled. They said, "Oh my God, we're never going to be able to sell all these dark prints." And the quilt shops said, "Oh my God, thank God we finally have some dark prints." So it was a real journey to figure out what. And sometimes Carrie would call the manufacturer, she said, and she would speak to some of these salespeople, and she would say, "I own a quilt shop and I want to order bolts of fabric." And they said, "What's a quilt shop?" Mm-hmm. So, and they also assumed that if they knew what a quilt shop was, that a quilt shop wanted small amounts of fabric, synonymous with the way a quilter at home would want small amounts of fabric. So it just took a while to connect all those dots and really figure out this industry and how to sell to it.
But the timing was so good, right? Because yes. After that, we, a lot of the fabric companies had to pivot because, home sewing changed. And it became less expensive to buy ready-to-wear clothing. Women went back to work. All of this stuff changed. Fabric started to be made overseas more cheaply. All of this stuff happened. And so that old business model fell apart basically. And so those companies, a lot of those fabric manufacturers had to either pivot to quilting and survive or went out of business. And so it was like this great moment, right? Like the very early 1980s of saying like, here is a new business model. If you can latch onto this and figure out how it works, you can keep going and in fact thriving, right? Because between then and let's say the mid 2000s, there was a boom.
Exactly. Yeah. The 80s were like a perfect storm of events with all of these fabric manufacturers being forced to move overseas because the mills no longer wanted to really deal with them. It wasn't a price thing necessarily, or a quality thing. It was because the mills were dealing with this huge international competition and they were switching to synthetics. And they weren't interested in these smaller orders of quilting cotton. So yes, the manufacturers had to change their model and moved overseas. And after the first few years of festival, they found a very, very ready audience, and the quilting cotton fabric just boomed.
Right. And having two shows was actually a really great model, right? Because you build the consumer audience, the hobby audience, the enthusiastic maker through the consumer show. And then you also build to the trade by having the trade show. So you kind of have both sides. And so that worked really well too, having them in tandem, having both shows in tandem as a business model.
Absolutely. And there are two other parts to that. So they also had the exhibit set up that you see at festival every year was set up, of course, for market. So vendors could go through there and see all of these, 1,000 plus amazing quilts and have access to what their customers were making. And so they learned a lot by seeing those beautiful quilts. And I think, again, going back to if you were an event company or a trade show model, you might hang a few quilts at your B2B event, but you would never go to the expense and trouble of hanging exhibits the way Quilts Inc. did in that space. So that was a huge learning opportunity. But also, just like the festival part, Carrie built in an education component to market very early as well. She brought in business experts to teach, many of them were women, how to run their businesses better, how to market, how to hold classes, how to teach all of these different things, how to kit up quilts and sell patterns. And the education component for the business owner was also a very, very strong component of market.
Right. Okay. So this really thrived for a long time, and so that I think that's really a kind of a fascinating thing to see how it builds. And if you want to know more about it or see pictures of the early days and how it grew, that's all in this book. And I'd love to hear about your process of writing this book. So you had this relationship with them. You had met them. You had this lunch with them when you got your award, and I wondered about the interview process. Where did you interview them? Did you go to their homes? How many times did you actually sit with them? Were they together, or did you go to see them separately? And did you had access, right, to the Quilts Inc. archives, and what do those actually consist of, and what do they look like?
Okay, first the interviews. I'll be really honest, it took me a long time to convince Carrie and Nancy to let me tell this story. And I kept talking to them and gently trying to persuade them and using all of my powers. And it took a long time for them to make the decision to allow me to tell the story. And I think because they had legitimate concerns about privacy, and they also didn't think their story was very interesting, to be honest. They kind of thought I was crazy. They just thought, they just did what they did. But eventually I did finally convince them, and it was a really, really fun and interesting process. So I interviewed them both alone at their home a couple of times, and then the three of us met more than a dozen times at Carrie's home in LaGrange for, I would say, almost day-long sessions. And I was the driver. I had this enormous spreadsheet, and I had everything sort of very well organized. And I would let them know in advance, on our next session, we're going to focus on, these 3 or 4 areas. And I tried to kind of keep everything on track and try to get, really kind of dig into the why and the how, and not focus just so much on the funny stories and things that happened along the way. And it worked really well. I take notes on a little tablet, and I, can watch and listen at the same time I'm typing. So I just captured everything into my computer, and then went back and wrote the story.
And were there things they were hesitant to talk about?
Well, we both agreed at the very beginning we weren't going to talk about finances. I actually don't think that's very interesting. In my corporate life, worked in investor relations for years and years and years. And I know how to write about that, but it's not very interesting for the quilter. I think the quilter is much more interested in the story and what happened. So we agreed from the beginning not to get into that. And I was happy to do that. And then, I share some bits of Carrie in particular, her personal life, but, there were other parts that I helped them, to remain private. It was more about the business story and what the two of them did together.
Okay. And did they talk at all about succession plans? Am I saying that word right? Succession plans. Carrie and Nancy aren't young women. I know Carrie is a year younger than my mom. And I'm 44. So she's in her mid 70s. I actually don't know how old Nancy is, but I think she's a few years younger than Carrie. So, they own the business together. And I just wondered, nobody is around forever. Not that I'm wishing them, ill will or anything, but I'm just wondering about, what happens next? Are they thinking about selling the show? Are they going to have their employees buy the show? Or what's the future hold? Did they talk at all about that?
I don't know that, to be honest. I cannot answer that question.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's not something that we spend a lot of time focusing on.
I wonder, yeah.
I'm sure that they have plans, but is not something they're, going to broadcast to me.
Right. I know. Totally. I will say that I did ask Carrie to be on the podcast maybe 2 years ago, and she initially did say yes and then said no. So Carrie, if you're listening, I would still love to have you on the podcast, and we'll see. So anyway, okay, anything else about the book that we didn't touch on that you wanted to make sure to share?
Oh, there's just so much in here. I mean, it talks so much about some of the fabulous exhibits that they did over the year. But I also really highlight several things that Carrie and Nancy did together that were really outside of festival, that I think were really monumental and very important for the industry. And I don't know if you have time to get into those. I mean, I can just mention what they are really quickly.
Yeah.
So one was defending really the American quilts and American history during the Smithsonian controversy in 1992. This actually started 91, 92 when the Smithsonian Institution licensed a company to reproduce 4 quilts from their 4 very, very historic American quilts from their collection. And the quilts were to be mass reproduced in China. And this set off an enormous alarm bells and controversy across all segments of the quilting industry in America, the business and the hobbyist as well. And many, many people were involved in this. A lot of quilters picketed in Washington, and there was just a lot of fury around this. But Carrie and Nancy really took a role from the business end of it, and they carried this all the way through to testifying before a committee of the House in 1993, and were really instrumental in defending this and helping the the American History Museum, which is part of the museum, it's part of the Smithsonian Institution, realized what they had done by sort of giving away part of this history, and how the mass reproductions and being made in China really stripped these beautiful historic quilts of their very history. So that was really important. They took on this project and they were very much at the forefront. And I think it's just, they did this for the passion and for quilts.
Yeah.
And this cost them thousands of hours of time, cost them money. It was a big distraction, but it's something that they just did. And I'm so proud of them for doing this. And I think it's so fascinating the way they took this on. And I think that's just one of the many examples of their leadership and what they were doing in those years.
Yeah, that's interesting. Right, sort of taking the issue of quilts seriously and the issues of American quilters seriously, and without that voice, right, it just goes.
Yeah,
it just things just happen, and there is nobody to speak. So
yeah, and they could have just let it go and let someone else do it. But they really stepped up, and I think everything they've done is really. Their whole careers is for the love of quilts and for the love of the women who are making these quilts, and that they be recognized.
Mm-hmm.
And
taken seriously. Yeah. And taken
exactly.
Seriously. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right. I think that's really important. Great. So, Teresa, I want to make sure we get to your list of recommendations, because you do have a few to recommend. It sounds like you just recently, after a long period of going back and forth, got yourself a long arm machine. So, good for you. It's a Bernina Q24.
Yes. And I'm just loving it. I had no idea it'd be so much fun. I was so ready to do it, and I feel like it's freed me in so many ways, and I'm just really, really loving it. It sews like a dream.
And you probably had to rearrange all the furniture in your room to fit it, because they're big.
I can't believe I made it fit, but I have a large bedroom that I turned into a studio, and I had to take out a lot of furniture that I probably didn't need anyway. And now I feel like my studio looks so professional. It's just machines and a cutting table and a large shelf with fabric, and it just looks awesome. There's no hodgepodge of other furniture and shelves and desks and junk in there.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, okay, your recommendation is take the plunge.
Yes, and I had another Bernina that's the 820. That's a sit down quilting, and the long arm. I think because it's a single purpose machine, it just sews so beautifully. There's nothing to distract it from doing its main job. It doesn't do buttonholes, and it doesn't go backwards. And it's just really, really cool and really fun. And
you've also taken on a giant hand embroidery project that is a 4.5 foot tall zebra. And I saw a picture of it. It is really amazing. It's based on a photo.
Correct. It's based on a photo, and I printed the photo out onto fabric at Spoonflower, and covering it, just using the photo as a guide. And I'm covering it with sort of this kind of stab stitch folk art like embroidery. It's going to be awesome. And it's really interesting in this day and age, because it's going to take me so long. It's not something that Instagram followers are going to be interested in, because they're going to long forget about it. But I love it. And it's going to be really cool. All black and white with a little cream and gray.
I hear you. I've been embroidering this Haptic Labs map of Boston. And it's doing the main streets and the waterways was pretty fast and Instagram worthy, and all was well. But now I have to do the side streets, and they're all white. Yeah. So it's white on white, and it's thousands of side streets. It's I might be done in 10 years, and definitely not Instagram worthy.
It's so therapeutic though, just to sit and do that. Really love it.
Totally. And it's nice because it's like you just like put it on my lap all through the winter. So it like keeps me warm, and I just sit on the evening and like stitch all the side streets. So it's all good.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
It's all good. But all right. And then you also wanted to recommend you're doing some research on minimalism, and you've been reading some writings of Donald Judd, it sounds like.
Yes, I have. And I went to his home/studio in New York. We go to New York a lot. And I was just so inspired. And of course, I've been to Marfa since I'm a Texan, where he has this huge foundation out there, and a lot of his sculptures ended up out there. But I'm fascinated with minimalism. I think that my quilting is probably my maximalism outlet, and the rest of my life is very minimalist. My home is very minimalist, and I just love it. And so I'm preparing a new lecture for QuiltCon in February on
nice.
minimalism. Yeah, in art and architecture. And I will tell you that I'm going to feature heavily in that the quilts of Carson Converse, and she is the real deal. And I'm just enamored with her quilts and her art and her aesthetic. She's, if you don't know of her, you should look her up. I feel like her quilts should be in the Met or the MoMA or the Whitney. And if I have anything to do with it, I will help them get there. And she's not a friend of mine. I have met her and I had lunch with her. I just emailed her and said, I just really want to meet you. And so we met last year at QuiltCon, but I know that there's a lot of minimalist quilts out there, but there's none like hers.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah,
I haven't
really,
looked at them.
really,
I'm gonna go look them up. That's awesome. And she was
amazing.
she was at QuiltCon.
And I think she's teaching this year in February, Carson. Sorry if I get that wrong, but yeah, I think she's teaching there this year.
Wow. Okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, Teresa, thank you very much for taking the time to be on the Craft Industry Alliance podcast. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you so much, Abby. It was wonderful.
And you've been listening to the Craft Industry Alliance podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Craft Industry Alliance is a community for craft professionals. And when you become a member, you get in-depth coverage of craft industry news, the opportunity to connect with fellow craft professionals for advice and support, and access to an educational library filled with ideas, tools, and resources to help you as you build your business. So join us at craftindustrｙalliance.org. Today's episode was brought to you by We Quilt, a new book by Thomas Knauer. The new face of quilting is vibrant, artistic, compelling, and expressive. We Quilt gives voice to the growing movement of makers who are reclaiming the craft of quilting, ensuring this art remains relevant and vital well into the 21st century. We Quilt by Thomas Knauer is available for pre-order now and in stores October 15th, 2019. Thank you so much, We Quilt. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.